Where is the hot alien girlfriend that Mass Effect promised me? Greetings, adventurers, and welcome back to the Den of the Drake. Other dragons hoard gold while I hoard internet cringe. You know why I love tabletop RPGs? Go ahead, guess in the comments for me a little bit. Throw me some of that sweet, sweet YouTube engagement. If you guessed it was spending time with friends, engaging gameplay, or practicing my writing skills, you'd be wrong! The correct answer is because tabletop RPGs allow me to have an excuse to let the intrusive thoughts win. If I break a bottle over someone's head in an RPG, I get an improvised weapon bonus with the Tavern Brawler feat. If I do it IRL, it's a minimum fine of $1,000 and up to 10 years. Most of the fun in D&D and other RPGs comes from when the game spirals out of control and leaves the rails in another galaxy entirely. But at the end of the day, just because you can perform an act of the chaotically stupid variety doesn't mean you should. The saga I have for you today stars a player who is so overwhelmed by the colossal freedom that D&D gives them that all of her in-game decisions default to the most self-destructive and ludicrously stupid actions imaginable. If I didn't know any better, I would have guessed that this story was about me from when I moved out of my parents' house about half a decade ago. Now, without any further delay, let's go ahead and dive right into the horrifying world of r/RPG horror stories. Enjoy. This week's saga comes from Reddit user Pixel Inquisitor and is titled The Saga of Looney Lucy. Part 0. Overview. A friend of mine was starting up a game of D&D 3rd Edition. This was quite a few years ago. 3rd Edition was the hot new thing then. Sax, a mutual friend of both of ours, was back in town after traveling abroad, so we invited him to join in. Sax was an excellent gamer, and had been gaming longer than the both of us, so we were looking forward to rolling dice with him again. He asked if he could bring his girlfriend to the game, and we were alright with that. We were okay with training newbies and neophytes. Anything to make the hobby spread. He then brought Looney Lucy. Looney Lucy seemed alright at first. She loved fantasy novels and had grown up playing RPGs on the computer, so she had the right mindset and at least a general idea of how fantasy tabletop games work. Indeed, Looney Lucy wasn't actually a big problem initially. It's looking back now, after 2 or so years of gaming with her, and however long ago this game was, that I now recognize the issues. It also means that while she did have a handful of WTF moments, they were spread out across months, and most of her actions were just low-key annoyances that didn't seriously affect the game. That is, until they started to build up and bubble before the final explosion and fallout. Looney Lucy's main issue was that she had a tendency to play chaotic stupid. I believe this wasn't due to trolling or wanting to be the center of attention, but just her being overwhelmed by the action she could take in-game, compared to video games. She did something crazy or stupid, simply because she was allowed to do so. Thankfully, she was rarely seriously disruptive with her actions and tended to be just silly instead of self-destructive, or actively destructive. And the times when she was about to do an action with serious consequences, the GM always let us convince her out of game that such an action was not in the group's best interests, and she could take back the action. Lucy's other issue was her rather obsessive tie to her boyfriend Sax. She declared her character, I think it was a ranger/rogue cross-class, was the girlfriend of Sax's character, and the two of them come from the same village. I assumed at first that this was just her easing into the game by playing a character that she could easily grasp, and having a quick tie to some other PC. Instead, it caused issues. Some of her chaotic stupid actions, I suspect, were caused by her wanting to be able to show her love in-game, in a way that didn't make sense in or out of game. For the most part, it was harmlessly odd. except for one instance that I will talk about in the future. This was pretty minor compared to everything else, but Lucy was also oddly shy, and despite being the center of attention when she went loony, she would often clam up and barely contribute during times when actual role-playing was required. I recall one time when we were all given an opportunity to voice our concerns to an assembled group of nobles on what the next course of action should be against the big bad. Even my rather loud, crude fighter had something to say. But when she was given the floor and asked if she had anything to say, she literally shrank back in her chair, squeaked no, and we quickly moved on. At the start, none of this was a deal breaker. We assumed that it was just Looney Lucy getting used to the game. As time went on, she did get more comfortable with her character. Sadly, she did not attempt to improve by becoming a more fleshed out and realistic character, oh no. Instead of writing off her earlier insanity as nervousness, or just ignoring it like the first session of a long-running sitcom, she doubled down. She kept going with her many kooky mannerisms, but now she got offended when the group called her out on them, presumably because they should accept her for who she is. I don't recall her ever saying outright, "I'm just role-playing my character." But I'm pretty sure that that was her justification. This was especially bad for my character, who I had roleplayed being quite exasperated with her character's weirdness. Instead of trying to make amends, she started hating my character. I would say in-game, but at this point I was starting to question the division between her and her character. Sax was still an excellent player, and often acted as a mediator and Looney Lucy's voice of reason. This did placate her, which is probably why she lasted 2 years, but couldn't hold her back forever. Stay tuned, soon I'll post part 1 in the saga of Looney Lucy, where her character nearly unalived herself to prove her love to Sax's character, and she first declared her hatred of my character. Ah, the classic trope of the chaotic, stupid player. I'll be honest, when I first started playing D&D, I probably would have found myself in this category. My first ever D&D character was named Detective Colonel Skeleton, who was a skeleton named Colonel who loved solving mysteries so much that he forgot to die. Yeah, you could tell I wasn't making that character with the express purpose of having an introspective character arc. My next few characters kind of followed the same trend, where they were created with the express purpose of creating situations for the most insane shit to happen. But here's the key difference between me and Lucy. I can admit that I was doing it all for attention, but Lucy seems to want the exact opposite. The reality is that a lot of players that are brand new to TTRPGs can find themselves pretty overwhelmed by all the new stuff that's being thrown at them. Hell, when I talk to new players, even D&D 5th edition is a mountain of new stuff for them to process all at once.
But Drake, D&D 5e is one of the simplest RPG systems to learn. If they can't figure out that, then how are they going to be able to add anything to my D&D party?
First off, go back to Reddit and get into a slap fight with someone like yourself instead of bothering me with your bullshit. And second, it's okay for new players to stumble. A lot of RPG horror stories are just newer players trying to understand not only the rules, but also the culture behind the RPG space. For example, don't split the party isn't explicitly written in the rulebook, because it's something that can be done in a way that's somewhat enjoyable. But a new player isn't going to understand the ramifications of just running off in their own direction. The problems rear their heads when new players stop being new, and still don't take the hint about what is and is not disruptive. Which might end up being a pretty accurate description of a person lovingly named Looney Lucy. Part 1. I'd unalive myself for love. Dramatis personae. Me, playing a loudmouthed fighter, though tended to get exasperated at Looney Lucy's actions and called her character out on them the most. GM, the DM. Sax, a good player, quite experienced. Looney Lucy's boyfriend both in and out of game. Played a barbarian/druid. Looney Lucy, the new player that Sax brought when we started our game. Airheaded, chaotic, stupid, obsessed with Sax, and as time went on, took any complaint about her character personally. Played a ranger/rogue. Her character and Sax's character came from the same village. There were other players, but they didn't play as big of a role, especially as Looney Lucy singled me out. I'd like to say my character, but I'm not too certain, as the target of her anger. As mentioned in the previous topic, most of Looney Lucy's actions were not outright disruptive, just kooky and kinda nonsensical. She was new to tabletop RPGs, so we cut her a lot of slack as she got used to the game and how to play a character. Sadly, as she started to learn and get comfortable, she began to get more and more annoying. I believe this incident is one where she started to go from silly but harmless to disruptive and chaotic stupid. We were passengers on a ship traveling to the south to advance the plot. For whatever reason, we had anchored in a sheltered inlet at a tropical island. Naturally, tropical in D&D translates to everything wants to kill you, even the plant life. So our foray to the island was quite eventful. But our event happens on the way out. We were rowing our boat back to the ship when a swarm of water snakes, possibly eels, it's been a while, but I'll assume snakes, attacked our rowboat and capsized it, and began pulling us under the water. We were right next to the ship when our boat capsized, so there were ropes tossed down to pull us back out. Thus began a series of grapple and swim checks to get everyone out of the water. There were quite a few snakes, so it was hard to try and help other party members without more snakes coming in to give you enough to worry about. My character, being a fighter with lots of ranks in swim, was easily able to fight his way out of the sinewy mess, and thus dove back in to help out other party members. Sax wasn't quite as skilled, but he was still able to hold his own and help others. Looney Lucy was horrible. She could barely grapple and had no ranks in swim, and so kept getting pulled under the water. It didn't help that Looney Lucy refused to leave Sax in the water and would always swim over to help him out, which always resulted in her failing her swim checks, floundering in the water, attracting more snakes, getting pulled under, and usually forcing Sax to save her, which ended up delaying Sax's escape so she wouldn't leave and repeat. Finally, she starts drowning and falls unconscious. I was able to grab her body, fight my way out, and started climbing the rope, intending to deposit her on the deck and then dive in to help out Sax. That is, until the healer burned a spell and quickly got her conscious again, at which point she screams, "Sax!" Well, Sax's character's name, but you get the point, and immediately moves to dive back into the water. Without any ranks in swim, half drowned and barely able to help herself. Not wanting to deal with fishing her body out again, I moved to grapple her to prevent her from jumping off the ship. She does not take this well and starts screaming at my character. I will clarify that she was doing this in character, though perhaps motivated by out-of-character emotions. Let me go. I need to help Sax's character. Sax's character could take care of himself. Instead of taking the hint that she should let those of us who are more skilled help out Sax, who I will remind you was mostly succeeding at his swimming/grappling checks, she struggled furiously, determined to wiggle out of my grasp and help her boyfriend, thus preventing me from being able to help Sax. The NPC crew of the ship were rather confused and didn't want to get involved, leaving me to hold Looney Lucy down as best as I could to stop her from drowning herself to prove her love. Finally, we got Sax back on board. Looney Lucy ran to embrace him and started shouting vitriol at my character, presumably hoping to get Sax to denounce my actions. Sax attempted to mediate instead, stating that my character had his reasons to do so, and that we're all alive and well now, so no harm done. I speculate he didn't want to have to choose between his party and his girlfriend, and so acted to try and reconcile the two. Looney Lucy stopped her tirade, but it was clear that she still hated my character for stopping her from saving her boyfriend. At the time, I figured that this was just another one of her in-character chaotic stupid actions. Just one more reason for my character to be frustrated with her. But it was a fun encounter. Looking back, I suspect that this was the beginning of Looney Lucy's downward trend of blurring the divide between her and her character, and enforcing her chaotic stupid as an actual character trait, as well as her character's hatred of mine. Tune in next time for part 2. where Looney Lucy decides that the possibility of murdering the party is a small price to pay for friendship. So this is another thing I see pop up in new players from time to time. Now, before I continue, I don't want any of my herder new players lol talks to discourage anyone from playing the game and playing their characters the way they want to. The whole point of an RPG horror story is to laugh at dumb shenanigans, but secondly is to learn from the mistakes of the people in the story in order to improve our own games. Okay, moving on. What Lucy is displaying here is what I like to refer to as trying to shove a square-shaped action into a round-shaped set piece. Obviously, Lucy saw this dangerous scenario as an opportunity to create an awesome movie moment, where her character banishes her fear and throws herself into harm's way in order to save her beloved with the power of love or some other similar cliche, but keeps getting narratively cock-blocked by the dice in her own stats. And instead of trying to find a way around the brick wall, she keeps bashing her head into it. New players will get ideas in their heads and say to themselves, "This needs to happen," and will give a real-time example of the definition of insanity, trying over and over again to make a potential narrative event happen. I'm not saying that you should avoid trying to create narrative moments. Far from it, it's one of the best parts of playing D&D. But what I am saying here is that there will be times where you just need to let an idea go and acknowledge that the scene that you had in your head just isn't gonna work out the way you want it to. Instead of beating your head into a brick wall, try and see if there's a way around the wall. Maybe if Lucy's character had access to magic, she could cast spells to help other characters to save her boyfriend. Maybe she could use her own wits to create a flotation device to save herself and Sax. However, dear listener, it seems like what we have witnessed here is not just a player who is obsessed with creating contrived character moments, but also a seed being planted. And something tells me that this seed is not gonna blossom into something that OP is gonna like. Part 2. Anything for a friend. When last we left off, Looney Lucy had roleplayed a fool in love by trying to save her boyfriend Sax from water snakes, despite being unable to swim nor easily able to fend off snakes. My character prevented her from doing this, led her to resenting me. It was sometime later we were deep in the bowels of a dungeon underneath a massive temple of evil, located in the center of a long-lost city of the dead, surrounded by inhospitable jungle weeks away from civilization. We were, as I believe they say, balls deep. Fortunately, the dungeon complex was massive, and we were able to find isolated corners that we could hole up in and rest, admittedly very nervously. Basic supplies weren't an issue yet, but it was clear that we were on our own, with only each other to trust. Compounding this situation was that the artifact we were after was also desired by multiple other unpleasant people, who had sent their own bands of adventurers after it, and none of them were the sharing type. So we were surrounded by undead and monsters, with the occasional rival adventurers willing to kill the competition. Tensions were pretty high. This also meant that we were not in the mood for too many jokes, and especially not for Looney Lucy's usual brand of kookiness. Not that I should throw too many stones. My character was actually a bit of a clown as well. Arrogant and boisterous, and not always able to cash the checks that his mouth wrote. But even I recognized the seriousness of the situation. Jokes had to be carefully timed to break tension and add levity, and not expose the party to danger. Looney Lucy, still a bit grumpy after the previous incidents, had started to withdraw, not interacting with the group much, and only really talking to Sax. Especially as whenever she did RP, she would do something chaotic stupid and piss off the group. I suspect she may have started to resent me as I could be a clown and crack a joke, and the party appreciated it. But when she felt she did the same, we got on her case about it. Somewhere in the dungeon complex, we had recovered a magical sword. Somehow, Lucy claimed it and wielded it in battle. I forget the course of events that led to this, but it may have been Lucy finding the sword and quickly claiming it and using it before any of us could stop her and tell her of the wisdom of not using a magic item until it's been successfully identified. It sounds like something she would do. Wouldn't you know it, the sword was intelligent and could speak to us. It was your classic bloodthirsty sword that wanted to bathe in blood, and wasn't particular about whose blood. Lucy proudly told us of her new friend. We were naturally quite suspicious, and rather pointedly asked if the sword would force her to kill us if it got thirsty and there was nobody around to feed it. Remember, undead-infested temple dungeon. The sword was rather transparently evasive in its answering, but it pretty much admitted to us that, yes, it would force Lucy to attack us if it wanted blood. A quick meeting and we asked Lucy to drop the sword. This dungeon was not the place to risk our survival on an intelligent, bloodthirsty sword. Especially as Lucy was an archer and didn't need a powerful magic sword to stay relevant. She looked offended and refused. We then, as a group, with Sax acting as the spokesperson, practically pleaded with her to drop the sword. As far as I knew, the sword wasn't cursed in a direct way, as in no note passing had happened between her and the GM, so it wasn't compelling her to keep it. And if it was, there wasn't even a single check made to resist the effect. So clearly, Lucy wasn't trying. Again, she refused, starting to look hurt that we would even suggest such a thing. She tried to withdraw, claiming that her character simply ran, though our group had surrounded her. Why did she want to keep the sword that was a threat to the party? She said it was my only friend. The rest of you clearly hate me, and the sword is the only person who was nice to me. So I am keeping it, and you cannot make me give it up. We made her give it up. My character led the charge, getting hit by the sword as she attacked to protect her friend, but we were able to dogpile her and force the sword out of her hand, disposing of it through a cunning use of pass wall down into the solid rock to bury it instantly. Not sure if the spell works that way by the book, but the GM allowed it. Naturally, this really kicked off Looney Lucy for killing my friend, and she again withdrew from the party and the game, only contributing to combat and barely engaging otherwise. Even her boyfriend she only followed begrudgingly in-game. Again, at the time I figured that this was just her role-playing, though certainly not in an optimal way, and what happened was in-game and stayed in-game. Still, looking back, I feel like she was starting to take this personally, and this anger would fester until the final incident. Soon I'll get to part 3, where Lucy holds the game hostage. Oof, yeah, that was tragic to behold. See, this could have actually been a pretty cool character moment for Lucy, but I'm not gonna lie, I see fault on all sides here. Lucy's complete inability to compromise with the party is pretty annoying to say the least. You gotta be able to give and take in a game like D&D, because the health of the group is directly correlated with the health of everyone's individual characters. I understand that after spending time making a character and then playing them for God knows how long, only to see them get hurt or even killed by a completely preventable threat is pretty damn frustrating. However, having a potential roleplay moment and new magical item thrown away against your will can also be pretty frustrating. The scenario that Lucy presented here actually seemed kinda interesting. A character who feels isolated from her friends is seduced by the words of an evil force, and must slowly be won back over by her true friends in order to save both their own lives and their friends' sanity. That could be a really cool hook for a character arc. But instead, the entire party ganged up on Lucy and said, "Yeah, we're not doing that," and against her will, literally threw her potential character arc away. It's not like the party was in any real danger here anyway. Unlike the water snake thing, it's not like the sword was actively trying to kill them at that very moment. Believe it or not, it's not just the DM who facilitates player happiness, but it's the other players as well. If you're playing volleyball and someone sets you up for a spike, it'd probably make that person pretty happy if you decided to spike the ball. What would be pretty uncool would be grabbing the ball, throwing it in the trash can, and then saying, "Yeah, I'd rather be playing frisbee." So yeah, according to my subjective opinion, which is always objectively correct by the way, fight me, I see fault in all parties here. But let's see if this trend continues in our third and final part of the story. Part 3. Stop. At the time, I didn't consider Looney Lucy a bad gamer. I considered her a friend, and thought that she just played her character a little wildly, though on occasion had some bad moments. I also kept a divide between stuff in character and out of character. My characters may have gotten frustrated with her, but she was still welcome at the table, and I was disappointed when she couldn't show up to the game. When I first started this series, I thought back and noted what I assumed were isolated incidents that now seem to be part of a much bigger issue. But now, especially after the last chapter, I'm starting to wonder if Looney Lucy was just acting out at what she thought was unfair treatment. Much of this is theorizing on events long past, but it does seem to make sense. Perhaps she started to resent how when I clowned around in character, I got laughs and everyone loved it. Perhaps she was trying to emulate this with her own questionable actions, and hated how she got jeers and vitriol in character, and polite reminders of how to properly roleplay out of character. But now, time has come to bring this to a close with the last big event that I recall when gaming with Looney Lucy. I wish I could end this series with an epic apocalyptic apotheosis of absolutely absurd actions, arguments, and altercations. A climax of biblical proportions to end this series with a proverbial bang. Sadly for storytelling, but much more fortunately for the mental health and well-being of everyone involved, the final incident is not nearly as legendary. Though I'd still call it some solidly bad gaming. Well, I hope so, otherwise I wouldn't bother writing about it. Again, it was some months later out of game, and at least a few weeks later in-game. Our group had returned to civilization, where the orcish invasion that had been serving as a backdrop beforehand was in full gear. Our mission required us to get our allies on the other side of the occupied territory. A small elite group like our party could navigate our way through the enemy lines quickly and avoid the largest concentration of the enemy. We were successful in bypassing the most heavily fortified positions, and were now moving on the open roads, ready for combat, but confident that we had evaded the worst of the orcish forces for now. I do not remember if something I had said or done set off Looney Lucy, but this is where she decided that she had had enough. She announced that after we broke camp that she sat down and refused to move. Yep, no big argument. No epic meltdown, she just stopped and refused to continue. When asked, she said, "OP's character is a jerk. I am not traveling with him anymore." We asked in character with some frustration what exactly would be needed to get her to continue. We mentioned the fact that we have fought together for so long and had worked together through many deadly situations. We told her that while I may not have been the most polite individual, I had shown myself loyal to the party and willing to get serious when it was needed. I may not have liked her character as a person, but I showed no hesitation in fighting and risking my life for every member of the group. She relented enough to issue demands. My character would have to be gagged, have his hands tied behind his back, and never try to communicate with Looney Lucy's character, or even look at her directly if she was to continue traveling with us. It's been a while, but I'm pretty sure there were some other ludicrous demands of my character that she made. Cue the game grinding to a halt yet again as we all tried to negotiate with Looney Lucy just to get the game going. I even had my character attempt a heartfelt talk with her. The gist was that I understood she really didn't like me, but we were fighting to save the world here, and we need to put our differences aside. I even, still in character, as she was still doing this in character as well, though I do question how much was influenced by her own attitude, apologized for aggravating her, and asked us to at least work together as soldiers, if not as friends. That didn't budge her in the slightest, and she restated her demands to have my character walk around bound, gagged, and helpless. It took Sax spearheading the discussion yet again, essentially pleading with Looney Lucy to get the game going. She relented somewhat. Her stance now was that she would never speak to my character again, and never wanted me to say a word to her ever again. Relieved that we could get back to the actual adventure, we continued. Sometime after, I don't really remember how long, be it a week or a couple of months, Looney Lucy and Sax both left the table. At the time, both stated frustration with the way the GM had been running the game. Stuff unrelated to the friction between me and Looney Lucy. Again, looking back, I wonder if Looney Lucy had convinced Sax to leave the game due to her own hatred of how it was going. Sax is still with Looney Lucy. They moved some years ago, but I still game with Sax online. Don't know if he plays on tabletops anymore, I will admit. And there we go. The end of the Looney Lucy saga. End of story. Well, there it is. The lunacy of Lucy finally hit its stride. It's shocking how the crying toddler on the floor of Walmart technique didn't work out for her, though. Like I said in the last part, I can see why Lucy might feel somewhat slighted by OP, but thinking that these demands are actually reasonable in any way is actual lunacy. The other two parts could be interpreted as new player quirks, but this is Lucy flat out saying, I do not want you to be a part of my D&D experience anymore. Could you imagine if they actually went through with her demands? OP would literally just sit there in silence for 2 to 4 hours every week and occasionally be able to roll some dice if they were a good boy. F***ing insanity! Now, I will say that OP likes to keep bringing up how much of a jerk his characters are, so depending on whether or not OP knew where to draw the line on this recurring character trait, would determine just how insane Lucy's demands actually were. If OP were doing nothing but being a lovable rascal every session, then a gag may actually be somewhat of an improvement. But since I don't have any way to judge how irritating OP's characters may have been, I just need to go off of what's in the story. My final verdict here is that this is a group of players that just is not compatible with one another. Each of them seem to have their own problems that make the D&D experience less enjoyable for the others, including the DM apparently. The end of this story wasn't explosive or overall dramatic, but in my opinion, these really are the best kinds of stories because they're the most realistic. Despite appearances, this is actually a happy ending. They all just simply went their separate ways because trying to force a fun time out of a group of people that you don't really vibe with is just kinda pointless. One might argue that it's pretty loony. Ugh, barf. How about we go ahead and cleanse our palate of that line with some fan art? That's right, how about we go ahead and take a look at this week's Gallery of the Drake? This week's fan art comes from viewer Ren the Seer and depicts the 4 houses of the RPG horror story kingdom. Crispy's Tavern, D&D Doge, Crit Crab, and He Who Shall Not Be Named.
It is now time for sorting. Barry Hotter, we shall now see which house you shall call home.
Actually, my name is Harry.
Shut up! Shut the f*** up! Do you have any idea how many people will get upset if I say that name? All right, here we go!
Yes, very cringe. Den of the Drake.
Woo! Yeah! Come learn magic with the cool kids, baby! Thank you again, Ren the Seer, for submitting your art. I think it's actually pretty cool when I get fan art that features other creators, because believe it or not, the RPG horror story community is actually pretty tight-knit. So yeah, fan art with my internet friends is pretty tight. If you'd like to see your fan arts featured in Gallery of the Drake, be sure to send it to the email in my About section. Fan art is my favorite part of doing YouTube, and it means the world to me that I can inspire artists like you to create artwork like this. With the story over and artwork displayed, we're gonna go ahead and wrap up. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you feel like supporting the channel further, my Patreon and merchandise links are in the description. I would like to thank you all for listening, and I hope to see you next time in the Den of the Drake.